Hello everyone, here I am Dr. Priyanka Kumari, Assistant Professor in Psychology, working in Government PG College for Women, Rohtak. Here I am presenting a lecture on the topic of learning. Now at first, we will start with the definition of learning. At first, we should know what is learning and what is the use of learning in our daily life. So at first, we will start with the introduction of learning. As you all know, learning is one of the most important characteristics of human beings. An individual starts learning immediately after his birth in response to the certain stimuli present in the environment. Even a person's habit, interest, his or her attitude, knowledge, skills, and our personality is the result of learning process. Behavior of a person in certain situation it also indicates the learning process. All of the above mentioned things shows that learning helps the individual to adapt and adjustment in the environment. Now we come to the definitions of learning. So we can define learning as a relatively permanent change in a person's knowledge or behavior due to experience. Now, as you can see, this definition has three components. The first one is the duration of the change is long term rather than short term. The second is the locus of the change is the content and structure of knowledge in memory or the behavior of the learner. And the third and very important factor is the cause of the change is the learner's experience in the environment rather than fatigue, motivation, drug, physical condition, or physiological intervention. Now, and another definition is given here, as you can see. So, we can define learning as learning involves strengthening correct responses and weakening incorrect responses. Learning involves adding new information to your memory. Learning involves making sense of the presented material by attending to relevant information, mentally reorganizing it, and connecting it with what you already know. Now we come to the nature of learning. What is the nature of learning? So we can say that learning is a kind of process, and this process is continuous and universal. We can say the process of learning globally. Every person is learn something new. It involves past experiences and training, which helps to change the behavior of a person. It helps the individual to adapt the environment and to adjust in the new situation. It is a goal-oriented and purposeful process. Now, factors affecting learning process. So here are mainly three factors which we can say affect the learning process. So first one is factors associated with the learner, factors associated with the type of learning, and the third, factors associated with the material required for learning. Here are the factors related to the learners. So when we come to the factors related to the learners, these are the factors which affect the learning process. The first one is mental health of a person. The second is physical health of the person. If a person is not mentally or physically healthy, he or she can't learn the things properly. The third is motivation level of the person. If a person is highly motivated, then he or she will be able to learn more effectively. Fourth is goal and purpose. Next one is willpower and readiness, age of the person, basic potential of the person, gender of the person, and the last one is level of maturation and emotions. If a person can regulate uh, her or his own emotions accurately, and if a person is emotionally stable, then surely he can learn the various things in a better way. Now we come to the classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a theory of learning. This is the oldest theory of learning, and classical conditioning is discovered by Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian physiologist who worked in the field of psychology, mainly in learning. Ivan Pavlov, born in September 1849 and died in February 27, 1936. Pavlov was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1904 for research on the digestive system. Now we come to the classical conditioning. What is the process of classical conditioning? We will see. And what kind of experiment Ivan Pavlov did through this classical conditioning procedure. So, classical conditioning was first investigated by Ivan Pavlov. He was primarily interested in the physiology of digestion, as we discussed that Pavlov was a physiologist. During his studies, he noticed that dogs on whom he was doing his experiments started secreting saliva as soon as they saw the empty plate in which food was served. As you must be aware, saliva secretion is a reflexive response to food or something in the mouth. Pavlov designed an experiment to understand this process in detail. He again used dogs in the first phase. A dog was placed in a box and harnessed. The dog was left in the box for some time. This was repeated a number of times on different days. In the meantime, simple surgery was conducted and one end of a tube was inserted in the dog's jaw and the other end of the tube was put in the measuring glass. Now here in this figure, you can see the whole experiment of Ivan Pavlov, the dog here and the tube. Here you can see which was fitted from one side in the jaw of dog and from other side in the jar or glass. Here, this is the hardness to restrict movement by the subject, and the subject was a dog. Here, the tube for collecting saliva from subject mouth, and here is the glass or jar in which amount of saliva recorded. So this was the experiment of Ivan Pavlov, in which dog was the subject for his experiment. And this is how the classical conditioning experiment was done by Ivan Pavlov. Now we go through the second phase of the experiment. In the second phase of the experiment, the dog was kept hungry and placed in harness with one end of the tube ending in the jar and the other end in the glass jar. A bell was sounded and immediately thereafter food, which was meat powder, was served to the dog. The dog was allowed to eat it. For the next few days, every time the meat powder was presented, it was preceded by the sound of a bell. After a number of such trials, a test trial was introduced in which everything was the same as the previous trials, except that no food followed sounding of the bell. The dog still salivated to the sound of the bell, expecting presentation of the meat powder, which is food, as the bell had come to be connected with it. This association between the bell and the food resulted in acquisition of a new response by the dog, and the new response was salivation to the sound of the bell. This has been termed as conditioning. And that's how the experiment of classical conditioning happened. Now we will see the process of conditioning. The process of conditioning. In the classical conditioning, food is an unconditioned stimulus and salivation which follows it an unconditioned response. Here we denote unconditioned stimulus as US and the unconditioned response as UR. After conditioning, salivation started to occur in the presence of the sound of the bell. The bell becomes a conditioned stimulus, and salivation is a conditioned response. Where previously the bell was a neutral stimulus, and after association it will become a conditioned stimulus. Here we can denote the conditioned stimulus as CS and the conditioned response as CR. This kind of conditioning is called classical conditioning. It is obvious that the learning situation in classical conditioning is one of SS learning, which is stimulus-stimulus learning, in which one stimulus, for example, sound of bell, becomes a signal for another stimulus, for example, food. Here, one stimulus signifies the possible occurrence of another stimulus. And here you can see the procedure of classical conditioning is illustrated in table given below. Here is the whole method of classical conditioning. That's how a neutral stimulus became conditioned stimulus. As you can see, before conditioning, food was unconditioned stimulus. And we can say this is a natural stimulus. And salivation is unconditioned response. And we can say natural response. Here, bell was the neutral stimulus, and because of bell ringing, there is no response showed by the dog. And during conditioning, when bell and food were associated, then bell became conditioned stimulus. During association, when bell ringed first and after that food was given to the dog, then salivation occurred, that is unconditioned response. And after many trials, when the experimenter or Ivan Pavlov saw that after conditioning, when the sound of bell heard by the dog, the salivation happened in the dog as a conditioned response. Then we can see that after conditioning, the neutral stimulus, which was bell, it became the conditioned stimulus, and salivation happened in the dog as conditioned response. This is the whole process happened in the classical conditioning experiment or process. So classical conditioning we can see in our daily life, day-to-day basis. So here are some things in which we can see the classical conditioning in our daily life. The first one is fear towards certain thing. A child develop fear in his childhood due to classical conditioning, anxiety towards certain things, and not even fear or anxiety, even love toward a particular thing or a person, also developed due to classical conditioning. Our habit formation also developed due to classical conditioning, development of attitude, whether our attitude would be positive or negative, it is also happened due to classical conditioning. And even our pets training, the training which we are providing to our pets, that is also happened due to classical conditioning. So this is the whole phenomena or process of classical conditioning. Hope you are find it easy and interesting. Thanks.